The inhabitants of Africa, East, South, and West, seem to share a similar culture, even in farming, which should not be the case considering that farming in these regions did not come until 4000 BC. Now, if they came in 4000 BC and these cultures are completely isolated, why are there so many similarities in the way they carry themselves? For example, how they utilize women as the main machines of labor, and you will see what I mean. When the first Europeans entered Africa, they found it quite jarring how laborious the females as compared to the males in Africa were. Now, the difference between the European culture is that almost all the laborious work was done by men. And to find out that tasks that had been reserved for men in Europe are done chiefly by women is something that they did not expect. But this, I tell you, is not a single tribal thing. It's actually consistent throughout Africa. And I'm talking about things that are as deep as fetching firewood, chopping firewood, and stuff like that. Stuff that's reserved for men. If it wasn't for the fact that there are also things that are female oriented in Europe, but those tasks are also done by females in Africa. So it's not just a reversal, it's just that the African females do a lot of the work, including things like cooking, making clay pots, making scarification, beauty, adornment. It's not that men didn't do these tasks, it's that majority of the time women were responsible for them. The men themselves' role in these societies was to be the stewards or the chief or the guide for the women, basically telling them what to do and being the deciders of what happens in that society. I will give you an example from Herodotus talking about the ancient Egyptians. I now proceed to give a more particular account of Egypt. It possesses more wonders than any other country and exhibits works greater than can be described. In comparison with all other regions, therefore, more must be said about it. The Egyptians, besides having a climate peculiar to themselves and a river differing in its nature from all other rivers, have adopted customs and usage in almost every aspect different from the rest of mankind. Among them, the women attend markets and traffic, but the men stay at home and weave. Other nations in weaving throw the wool upwards, the Egyptians downwards. The men carry burdens on their heads, the women on their shoulders. They ease themselves in their houses, but eat outdoors, alleging that whatever is indecent, though necessary, ought to be done in private, but what is not indecent, openly. No woman can serve the office for any god or goddess, but men are employed for both offices. Sons are not compelled to support their parents unless they choose, but daughters are compelled to do so, whether they choose or not. In other countries, the priests of the gods wear long hair. In Egypt, they have it shaved. Now, to put that in context, he is talking about the ordinary person until he starts talking about the priests. And what he describes is not true when it comes to mass scaling. So, building pyramids, building large houses, building all kinds of stuff. It's only true for a very small amount. And of course, in this culture, you can see that there's a core culture of women doing a lot of the work, but it's been cut because of how taxing to the body a lot of ancient Egyptian work is. And as you can see, he talks about something that I had to leave in there, which is how the ancient Egyptians spin wool. And you will see that a thousand years later, there's a English person who documented how Africans spin wool and noticed how similar it is to how the ancient Egyptians do it. The mode of spinning and weaving in Angola, and indeed throughout South Central Africa, is so very like the same occupation in the hands of the ancient Egyptians that I introduce a woodcut from an interesting work of Sir Gardner Wilkinson. So he's alleging that the spinning of cotton in Egypt, ancient Egypt, is the same as the rest of Africa, of the Africans that he encountered. And as you can see, he's very familiar when I continue to read. He even provides illustrations to demonstrate. Keep in mind, this book is not about Egypt. This person is not writing a book about Egypt. He's writing a book through the travels of Southern Africa, Congo, and basically sub-Saharan Africa. But he recognizes the similarity with Egypt, and then he makes this comparison. For example, he says the lower figure are engaged in spinning in the real African method, and the weavers in the left-hand corner have their web in the Angolese fashion.
A man needs a woman to build a house for him, to milk his cows and do the household chores. But a woman needs a man far more, because women can never have rights of ownership over any living animal. To survive, they must attach themselves to some man with cows, be it father, husband, or son.
It does not matter what part of Africa you go to, just like these East African pictures are showing, that the people who live in Ethiopia, the tribal women, they build the houses. It's just the case. The reason for this is obvious. The houses aren't that difficult to build compared to like brick structures, which admittedly, when African tribes switch to bricks and tasks that would be backbreaking for females, men start to take the reign. With the adoption of modern cultures like Islam and Christianity, a lot of these tribal things like making women work are abandoned because the Easterners and Westerners considered making women work a no. Basically, it's considered unmanly. Leaving East Africa, we see the same trend in West Africa, especially amongst people who are still connected to their tribal obligations. But in some places in West Africa, in a lot of places that still hold on to their tribal obligations, men worked as well because over there they worked with mud brick, but the core workers are still female. Again, contrasting the shock and awe by other Westerners and other people from other around the world, it's very strange. Now you're probably wondering, what are they mixing in there? You saw the Maasai woman holding dung. This is something that is done all over Africa again. It's a very similar thing. They use cow dung, and in some cases, they mix it with clay, and they call it daga. And they use this clay mixed with cow dung to build houses. Now, this would be something that's like, okay, well, it's done in East Africa, it's done in South Africa, it's done in West Africa, but is it done in North Africa? Do we have any evidence that it's done in North Africa? In order to answer this question, we have to visit an old friend, Herodotus, who says They knead the dough with their feet, but mix clay and take up dung with their hands. The Egyptians are circumcised. Every man wears two garments. And as you can see here, he's depicting that they take clay and they mix it with cow dung. Again, in other places, this would be extremely strange. And it's even stranger because he's saying these people, they mix dough with their feet. Why are you mixing it with your feet? But then they hold clay and dung, cow dung, with their hands. The Fula tribes as well follow these ancient patterns. The Fulani tribes follow these patterns, and you will find this all over. Now, I'm not saying that there are no cultures or situations where the men find themselves being the majority of the workers, but the core culture, like I said, there's a core culture where the women do the majority of the labor and the men dictate.
Can I help? Yeah. So we have cow dung, and termites, right?
Termite mound.
Termite. All right. Termite mud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like that. Gotta massage it in. It still feels a lot like cow poop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It still has that main texture to it.
Yeah. That still has the texture. So a little like Band-Aid patch so it doesn't go through like this. Yeah. Two. There we go. Like this. Okay.
Now, considering everything I've told you, you can view this word brick in ancient Egyptian differently. For example, the word brick in ancient Egyptian is debit. The word brick in Bantu languages is donga or dongo. The word clay is dongo or daga in Bantu languages. And in Cushitic languages, the word clay or brick is daga. Of course, the cultures that I am explaining are cattle cultures, which is not surprising. You find the similar way they treat cows and cattle and stuff like that. They basically are just herders in the normal sense, but cattle is used firstly as money, and then it's used as trade goods for other nations, and then it's used as status, as you can see in multiple places. It's also been used to sacrifice in the death of an important person or in ceremonies. This is consistent in Africa over. This is obviously not that big of a similarity, considering that you can pretty much go anywhere around the world and find cattle culture. But what about finding words that mean the same thing within farming, like the word cattle or the word for a calf, like a calf, a small cow, which, as you can see, the word for cow in ancient Egyptian or baby cow is Torah or Toro, and the Bantu word for a baby cow is Tola. As you can see with the Coptic version, which is used in Egypt today, it's Tole. And in Zulu, the version of this word in Zulu is Itole. You see how that the transition is still preserved in the modern languages, the ancient Egyptians that transferred to Coptic and the Bantu that transferred to Zulu. But I will further prove to you that this word is not just a coincidence. For example, the word Torah or Tara in ancient Egyptian means hand, and the word Tola in Bantu languages means to pick something up with your hand. This word in Zulu means many things because it has to do with picking up, as you saw in the Nyanja language, which has nothing to do with Khoisan. If you notice, that tola over here means get, receive, find, and then in the original translation it means find out. And this is because this word has been used and switched meaning to mean other things. The most biggest part about it is it turned to tola in the Xhosa language, which makes it seem like it comes from the Khoisan languages, but it's not. It's just a different way of pronouncing a simple word that used to be Bantu. For the final product that has to do with eating and farming, let's go with red palm oil. And red palm oil, let's just read it. For centuries, people on the African continent, including the ancient Egyptians, used red palm oil for culinary purposes. Only recently has the minimally processed palm oil been introduced to Western palates with variable results. Now, something interesting about this red palm oil is that it's first discovered in West Africa and it doesn't grow in Egypt, yet they find it in Egypt, which means that West Africans and Central Africans were trading with the ancient Egyptians this palm oil or palm fruit itself for basically thousands of years. Because in ancient Egypt, we find it in like 3000 BC. So you find palm oil, red palm oil, and by the way, you don't find it outside of Africa. Up until 120 years ago, 100 years ago, it's not that long ago that you find it. And more than this, the word for red palm oil combines the Bantu and Niger languages. It's one of the words that we've confirmed, not me, linguists have confirmed, is originally from West Africa and must have moved with the Bantu people. For any of you who are curious, that word is bati or ibati, and this word means oil, or it means palm oil, or it means basically oil. And the word bati got transformed to the Bantu word gazi, which means blood. And the reason for this is because palm oil has the red palm oil has the look of blood. And so oils that came out of trees that had this tinge to it, palm oil, were then called blood, or blood was named after this oil. And most Bantu languages now have that word, both the palm oil word and the blood word, replacing the original word for blood in the Bantu languages, which we do not know what it is, but from West African languages, we could probably detect it. Thought to have been discovered very early in human use by West Africans. And using this linguistic method, the Bantu people expanded away from the West Africans at about 3000 or 4000 BC. So, given that they share a word for red palm oil, this tells us that at least 4000 BC is when this palm oil was in use. Now, given this, we can also add that the ancient Egyptians used it back in the day, and the trade was 5,000 years ago. Add that, so probably it's, 3000 BC, thereabout. I could go on and on and on and on and on about the similarities between Egypt, East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, North Africa. There's hundreds of information left over, but for now, let's parking lot that and make sure the cows come home.